Okay. Neil Pasricha, welcome to Shrink Wrap Radio.
Dave, thank you so much for having me here.
Well, I'm really been looking forward to this interview because I'm a big fan of yours. And of course, we're going to be talking about your latest book, You Are Awesome: How to Navigate Change, Wrestle with Failure, and Live an Intentional Life. And I have to say, you are awesome. and
Thanks.
yeah, and I know that's been
Even
that's
though
been
I don't
hard.
have a bunch of degrees behind me and a cool rug.
Uh-huh. Right. Not that I'm being ostentatious at all with my degrees. Uh, I'm interested in your book, your podcast, and your personal journey. And somehow we're going to explore all of those as much as we can in the time that we have. So let's start with your early life. If I recall, you didn't start off feeling awesome. Am I right?
Yeah, no. It depends how early you want to go, but basically you want to go like, at the very beginning. My mom and my dad came to Canada as immigrants. My dad from northern India and my mom from East Africa. They had an arranged marriage in England, and I was born in the 1970s, 1979, in Oshawa, Ontario, Canada, which is just an hour outside of Toronto.
Okay.
And yeah, that the beginning was rough just physically because I had a hernia, and it turned out that I was crying for the first 6 weeks of my life and nobody
Oh,
could
no.
figure out why.
Yeah.
So that we could explore if you want to, but then the journey of like my writing was also a bit of a rough start because it was when my marriage was ending and my best friend took his own life, and that's when I started writing about awesome things. So we could start at the very beginning or the
Well,
writing beginning, which is 10 years ago, whichever you prefer.
let's stay a little bit more with the personal narrative. What was elementary school like for you?
Oh yeah, this is a great question. So yeah, so I mean, I was the suburbs of Toronto in the 1980s were essentially all white. So my sister and I were the only brown kids in our school. And I was actually asked recently, what kind of racism did you experience, et cetera. And I said I didn't really experience any. I actually had a very my upbringing was just so surrounded by kindness and love. And my parents gave us, you know, a happy, healthy home, and they cooked meals for us every night. And I actually felt like we won the lottery. My parents did all the hard work, and my sister and I, if anything, Dave, we
Yeah.
actually just took it all for granted. You know,
Okay.
we assumed that this was the way life was.
Yeah.
Even though my parents didn't grow up with, my dad for sure never had power, all was on in his house. He didn't have a school across the street, he didn't have a hospital down the road. So I felt really lucky, but I didn't observe it as lucky at the time. And the other thing to mention is my dad, because he was a new immigrant to Canada and had experienced none of these sort of luxuries, he was so full of awe that my sister and I kind of got that from. Like he would be like, "Wow, it's snowing outside."
Uh-huh.
"Wow, it's snowing outside." Like this
Yeah.
that phrase, like, "It's snowing. We can go outside and we can play in the snow. Can you believe it?" Look, and he'd marvel at all the stickers and all the fruits and vegetables like in the grocery store. They'd be like, "Wow, you can get a mango from Mexico. You can get a kiwi from New Zealand." So it was like I did not realize that that was special,
Yeah.
but I was constantly injected with this idea that we're pretty lucky to be here.
Yeah. So you come by awesomeness in a very early on, uh,
Yes.
uh, getting that lesson of wonder, and which comes through, and I think in all of your podcast interviews. So, but was elementary school a confrontation with your differentness that you had to struggle with, or high school?
I think I honestly thought I was white. I mean, I think I thought I was white. I mean, everybody around me was white. All my friends were white. And I actually think I wanted to be white. If
Yeah.
anything, the racism was self-directed. If anything, the racism was me thinking that I didn't want to be this culture, this upbringing, thinking that my parents, a kid might say something, like, "Oh, your house smells funny," when my mom was making like curry chicken or something like that.
Yeah.
Or, my parents didn't necessarily have fancy clothes, or we didn't have nice furniture, and we kind of drove a beat up van, and we we went to the temple sometimes on the weekend, and it was songs sung in a different language, and everybody sat on the floor, and Christmas, which as the time of our recording we're pretty close to, was like a commercial institution. There
Right.
was Christmas trees, there was Christmas pageants, there was Santa Claus, there was a Christmas, the principals dressing up, there's presents. Whereas Diwali, which is what my parents celebrated when they came here, they had never celebrated Christmas. They celebrated Diwali, Festival of Lights in Hindu culture. I mean, there was no tree, there was no pageant, no one dressed up as Diwali Claus, there was no
Yeah.
so it was like, culturally growing up, if anything, the racism was self-directed. I was like, well, that Christmas thing sounds a lot better, you know? And so the wrestling that you asked about was more just me trying to actually navigate inwards and culturally discover myself, which, by the way, at age 40 is a process I'm still going through
Still
right
going
now.
through it. Yeah. So it sounds like self-image was an issue during that time, that this critical mind that we tend to go to so easily. And so we'll jump ahead in time then, and eventually you end up, well, I don't want to skip quite that far. You get a job at Procter and Gamble,
Yes.
and that was a really big deal. And reading that in your book really brought home what a big deal it was, because I've been involved in market research, and I've encountered a lot of people in that field who came out of Procter and Gamble. So I have some sense of the environment you were talking about, which was exceedingly high expectations, demand for high level performance, etc. Do I recall that you got fired from that job, or did you quit?
Yeah, I quit just before I got fired. I was gonna get fired because they put me on a performance improvement plan, which is a fancy piece of paper that basically says, um, we want to fire you, but we don't have enough of a paper trail. So let's build one together. You know, why don't you write down all the things that you're supposed to do and you're not doing well? And then if we'll write down some stuff too, and when it gets full, we'll fire you. And I could see that piece of paper getting fuller and fuller and fuller, and it was like not looking good. And I could not handle the emotional magnitude of getting fired. So I quit. I quit. I ran away from it.
Yeah. And what did you
And
do then? How did, where did you find your resilience in that experience?
well, at the time, I was not resilient. I was grinding my teeth. I told myself that I would never find another job. I would never get certainly, and I would certainly never meet my future wife, since all these young professionals all work together in big companies, and I would be stuck selling air conditioners at a trade show in Cleveland, slicking my hair back, trying to hit on people at the hotel bar. Like I was mentally picturing the worst case scenario. And the point I make in You Are Awesome, because the book is all about resilience, as you're pointing out, is that that's a tendency we all share these days. There's research out of Malawi that shows that we, especially high performers, we point the spotlight right on ourselves, and we think if something bad happens, we think it's all my fault. I screwed up. I did something wrong. I'm no good. When
Right.
the truth of the matter is, no one cares about no one cares about you. People aren't looking at you with the spotlight. They don't even notice you. They're looking at their cell phones. But we have a tendency, especially when we're younger, to think everything is all about us. So actually, it's a bit self-centered. It's a bit self-centered to think that, like, oh, I'm going to hurt this company. My job's ruined. My life's ruined. No, just we collectively as a species right now need to chill. We need to chill. We are being too hard on ourselves. And at Procter and Gamble, I lost a lot of weight. I couldn't sleep. I wasn't eating. Like I said, I'm getting a mouth guard because my teeth are getting grinding. And then I run into my next thing because I'm so petrified of having no job for even 3 months. Although that would have been healthier for me to do some like internal work to
Yeah.
figure out what I wanted. I rushed in and I buy a franchise with my dad so that I have something to do. And I'm like 22 or 23, and I'm buying a Quiznos sub franchise with my dad, which turned out to be a whole other problem.
Yeah.
Problem. But this is the thing: when you run from one problem and you run, if you're running from a problem, you're probably going to run right into another one,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Well, we have a Quiznos near here, actually. Uh, Eventually, you
Where
end
do
up
you live, by the
working.
way?
Huh?
Where do you live?
Oh, I live in Northern California, a little community called Rohnert Park, which is about 60 miles north of San Francisco.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, I don't know if you've
Sounds like
ever heard
wine
of.
country, no?
Yeah, Sonoma County. Yeah, that's where we live. So eventually you end up working for Walmart. And what did you do at Walmart? Yeah, tell us about Walmart.
I worked at Walmart for 10 years. So just the pathway there from the restaurant. The restaurant did not work out. A year later, I sold it at a loss because I thought I would make money doing it, and I didn't. That's basically That's basically the short version of the story. I learned a lot while there. I went back to school, came out of it, got a job at Walmart, and I started in the HR department. Um, and my job title, I grew up into a job title called Director of Leadership Development. So my job was there to educate and grow our leaders across the whole business.
Did you feel that you were well prepared to do that? You went to Harvard and got a business degree probably prior to that, right? A
Yeah, after
master's?
the Quiznos and before Walmart, I went to Harvard for 2 years for business school.
Yeah.
I'm as shocked as you are that I got in because I didn't have like dean's list marks and all this stuff. But the thing I learned about getting into Harvard was different is better than better. At the end of the day, most people applying to most schools have a similar background if you can be unconventional or unique. I had a comedy writing background. I'd done a stint in the New York City loft in Brooklyn on a comedy show. I had the Quiznos experience, which was certainly unique. And maybe, I believe, from a Harvard perspective, I was like an X factor. I was like someone doing something different,
Yeah.
you know? And so I got in. I went there for 2 years. I felt like a loser there because, of course, everyone's smarter than me and more successful than me and wealthier than me. And I got a great piece of advice there, though, which is find small ponds so you could be a big fish. I hung out with the dean of Harvard for a lunch because he gave me a scholarship. And he said, why are you so stressed? And I was like, oh man, we're trying to get the same like 5 jobs at like Google or Goldman Sachs or McKinsey. And he's like, why? I'm like, well, everyone wants the same jobs. I guess they pay the most or they're the most interesting jobs. And he's like, you're like a guy outside a beach right now, racing to get in to try to land one of the sunbathing beauties there. But there's 1,000 other people beside you at that beach. Your odds of landing one are super low. He's like, go to the library, find a nerd studying in the stacks. Be Go somewhere, get a job at a company that's not coming to Harvard, because if the
Yeah.
company's flying on private jets to Harvard, that tells you something about them. If you call up the broken companies, the banker companies, the companies with a reputation issue or a PR problem, if they let you in, you'll actually get a job with a lot of learning, a lot of place to spread your wings. You'll get a seat at the table. People will take you seriously. You'll get bigger jobs with more learning and more growth, and you'll end up doing better.
Yeah.
Okay. Again, a similar adage on that phrase, different is better than better. But in this case, the lesson is to be a big fish in a small pond. That is backed up by research in 1984. The Herbert Martian team show that if you actually put yourself in a small pond, then your academic self-concept or your opinion of yourself actually rises for up to 10 years after you leave the pond. So I
Yeah.
called up 100 companies that were going through a tough time. Walmart had a flat stock price for 10 years. And they had a reputational problem at the time because they were known to like take out small town America and all that stuff. So, but they were huge. They had 2 million employees. And I wanted to learn how to manage and grow leaders. So it was a perfect place for me. And I loved it. And people were very kind to me. And more importantly, Dave, I had something no one else had. When I got to the office of 1,200 people, nobody else there had a similar background to me. So, like the dean predicted, I was given unique roles, unique responsibilities that I could learn from much quicker.
What a great story.
So,
What did you learn in that Walmart experience that's planted the seeds for the work that you've done since? Because I feel like there's a real connection.
what's the connection you see?
Um, well, I think of your job at Walmart, perhaps I imagine it as you're in the role of kind of a cheerleader. Um, and I think that's very much part of what you're doing in your podcast and certainly in the books that you've written.
Hmm.
I
Yeah, I
hope that
asked
doesn't seem demeaning to you using the term
oh, to be a
cheerleader.
cheerleader? Yeah, I mean, the job title was director of leadership development. So my goal was, I had a team of 12 people, and what I was trying to do at the company was basically at the top of most organizations, you've got a lot of very highly paid people, right? They're called executives.
Yeah.
And what almost every company does is they hire executives from other companies. Okay. That's very
Mhm.
expensive because you end up paying 1 year's salary ish as like a recruiting fee. And it's also expensive because those people don't know your company's culture and history. And because like 50% of them don't work out. So like every other one you hire just within a year flames out and they leave.
Yeah.
So the proof that I had from my background was that if I could grow leaders internally to be executives inside Walmart, then it's cheaper and
Mhm.
they know the culture
Yeah,
and
yeah,
they have a much lower turnover rate. So
yeah.
my job was, how do you take vice presidents and turn them into executives? How do you take directors and turn them into vice presidents? So the way I would do that is develop curriculum that included, an education component. Maybe we sent them to Harvard or similar executive coaching, trying to get them feedback from people all around them so we could figure out what's working for them, what's not. We tried to get them team-based assignments. We tried to get them international mentors. So I did a lot of work with like kind of one level below the top level in order to try to build them up to be at that most senior level.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
developed the first ever Walmart Executive MBA, which is the first ever Walmart Global Executive Development Program. We always done it country by country. And so I developed one where people from around the world at an executive level to go. And then they have
Uh-huh.
a cohort of people around the world. And then, of course, they have a mentor from another country. And then, unsurprisingly, they get promoted and they have an infrastructure set up around them that helps them be more successful.
Yeah.
And I never really thought about it before, but you're making me think and realize that, yeah, that's not dissimilar to the work I do today. The work I do today is I think, write, and speak about living intentionally. I'm not trying to graduate people up to be the C-suite of a Fortune 500. I'm trying to get people to graduate up and into their most intentional life, whatever
Sure.
that looks like.
Yeah.
So it's a more vague output, but the idea is the same, is that you're on a path. It's a 30,000 day path. It's called a lifetime. It's not that long. It's only 30,000 days.
Mm.
I believe we share a common goal of trying to live that life as best we can. We know many of the things that create happiness in that life, whether that's the strength of our relationship with our family, with our friends, our physical health, our emotional health. And that's pretty clear from the last 20 years of positive psychology research. The challenge most of us have is, how do you get there? Because most people feel overworked, overstressed, under time, and they don't have time to meet their mom for lunch. They don't have time to read books, even though reading books is a lot better for you than reading screens. Are unable to not look at their cell phone first thing and last thing. I just gave a speech to, I won't say the name of the company, last week, and I said, how many of you guys in this room, it's 400 people, check your cell phone right before bed, sleep with your cell phone right beside your bed, and check your cell phone when you first wake up? And I'm not kidding, Dave. Of the 400 people in the room, it's like 398 put their hand up.
Yeah. Well,
But so they know that that's not healthy.
right.
They know. I said, if you drank a bottle of wine before bed, slept with a bottle of wine, and drank it in the morning, what would we call you? Alcoholic. You're a phoneaholic. But they know that's not healthy. But they cannot. What they're missing is the ladder or the pathway or the infrastructure or the guidance or the role modeling or the support system or the tools to get them from where they are today to the intentional, thoughtful, grounded, meaningful, love-filled life they want to be living. And for some people, that's like a baby step. For other people, that's like 10 years of work away.
Yeah.
It depends where they are. But my job, as I see it, is to help people get from point A to point B. And the reason I think I'm good at it is because I'm doing that too. I'm not some guru on a mountain who's just got all enlightened and figured it all out. I'm trying my best to live my most intentional life. And all I'm really doing through all of my books, through my podcast, through everything like this podcast, is just sharing my own journey. So the journey at Procter & Gamble, the journey at Harvard, the journey at Quiznos, these are all parts of my journey. They're elements of my story. But as we all know, in the specific lies the general, right? Like, so I share those stories and people say, oh, that happened to me. I also got fired, or I also felt like a fish out of water at school, or I also got a divorce, or I also lost a friend. And then suddenly we have connective tissue, and then we can have a
I
meaningful
can relate
conversation.
to everything you've been saying along those very lines. I've got a story about quitting before they could fire me, etc. Divorce, all of those things. Most of my interviews have been with people in the broad world of psychology and psychotherapy. And all of your work strikes, or at least as I get it through the podcast and through your writing, it strikes me as profoundly psychological. Did you study psychology at all in school?
No, never.
Never. Okay.
No. And I'm not one of these people who pretends to be one. Like
Yeah.
I don't put You just never see those letters that I have after my name. I don't throw a doctor in front of my name. I don't say I'm a psychologist. I don't wear a fancy clothes on stage. I don't stick a corporate logo or a school logo on my slides. And these are all things that a lot of people do. I don't do any of those things because all I think I do, Dave, all I do is I distill work by people like you and your peer group into simple, actionable things. That's it. That's all I do. I'm not smart enough to be in an ivory tower or a school doing 20 years of deep research on somebody and coming out with an incredible, like I look up to those books. I could never write one of those books. All I do is read all of those books. And then
Yeah.
I try to make things simple for me. Like what's the 20-minute way you start your day? What's a gratitude game you can play at dinner? What's a book you should read? That's the kind of stuff I'm into. I'm into the simple, tactical, actionable stuff because
Yeah.
that's what works for me.
Yeah, sure. And I can relate to that as well. So you've written a bunch of books before this one, all with a very positive slant. And I believe that story of your career in publishing and public speaking and all, that started with a blog,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
I think a blog. I don't follow blogs, so blogs were not important somehow in my experience. Um, you, and I guess podcasting is like a blog, but but not in some ways. So tell us about how that blog exploded and carried you into a very successful career.
Yeah, sure. So as I mentioned at the very beginning, although I didn't expand on it, 10 years ago, my wife left me and my best friend took his own life. And those two things happened very close together. And both of them also had like the premonition factor, like you could kind of see both of those things coming. My friend Chris attempted suicide once before, and he had been suffering from severe mental illness, demons, voices in his head, very, very severe. And my wife, we'd had conversations and, it was clear that something was missing. So it was in the throes of those emotions that I started a blog to channel my energy and to provide a little bit of an emotional release. And so I just started it one night. It's called 1000awesomethings.com. It's still up. It's still active. I wrote it from 2008 to 2012 every day for 1,000 straight weekdays.
So this
I would
was
come home.
like a self-prescribed, sounds like a self-prescribed uh, treatment for the existential situation that you were in, instead of wallowing in all the negativity of what was going on. You decided to focus on what was positive.
Yeah, and I didn't know all the research back then. Like there's a lot of research that says journaling is really good for you, focusing on gratitude is really good for you. Getting yourself into a flow or meditative state is really good for you. I was doing all those things every night while writing my blog. I didn't know that. All I was writing about is like fat baseball players, wearing warm underwear from out of the dryer, playing on old dangerous playground equipment. I was writing things that made me smile, and that was enough. That gave me, honestly, what it did is it just took me from being an insomniac to someone who was able to sleep. I was still stressed, still lost a lot of weight, still black bags in my eyes, and I was still, by the way, in twice a week therapy, should mention. So it's not like the blog was my therapy. I want to mention to anyone listening, I actually had a therapist as well.
Okay, good.
But the blog was an outlet, and that outlet was really important. So many of us bottle up our emotions, but we need to release them somewhere, somehow, somewhere safe. And I wasn't writing about my divorce. I wasn't writing about losing my friend. But as the blog went and got bigger, I became more comfortable. And then I started to write and reveal a little bit about my relationship ending and my friend taking his own life in the website.
Yeah, and then it exploded into a whole series of books and this remarkable career. I have to talk about your podcast. Like others around the world, I've become a huge fan. I hadn't heard of you or your podcast till your assistant reached out to me for a possible interview. And so, doing due diligence, I thought I'd check it out. Well, I'm hooked. And, and um, so I think I've listened to about 10 or so
Oh,
episodes.
wow. Thank you.
Yeah, and I listened this morning to Egg is her last name.
Jen Egg.
Jen Egg.
Yeah.
This morning I was listening to that partly in
She is very
preparation.
provocative.
Yeah, and partly I was listening to that in preparation to kind of get in the flow with you, but also just because I listen to your podcast. That's one of the, I don't listen to that many podcasts because there are only so many hours in a
Well,
day.
exactly. Nobody can listen to that many.
Yeah, and we also share something in common in relation to our podcast. The number 15 is a significant one for both of our podcasts. So tell us about your podcast and the role of number 15.
Sure. Well, 5 years ago ish, my wife made fun of me, Leslie. So
Your new wife.
yeah, Leslie and I. So after being single and taking a year to hit an online dating site, taking another year to start dating again. I mean, years went by, and I eventually met someone who I fell in love with. Her name was Leslie. We started dating. We dated for a year. We moved in together for a year. And those were my two mental barriers I put in my own brain. I was like, I have to date someone for a year before I live with them. I have to live with them for a year before I marry. Like, I don't want this to happen again. So, by the time I got down when me and I proposed to Leslie, we were both really, really, really excited and confident and sure in our relationship. And now we've been married for 5 years. So, and we have three little kids. And she made fun of me a few years ago. She was like, Neil, how come you don't have any books? And I was like, what do you mean? I have books. She's like, no, you don't read. I was like, well, who's got time to read? Nobody has time to read books anymore. Like, ask anybody. Everybody would say that. There's no time to read. And she's like, yeah, but you're a writer. you really need to be reading. And so I thought about it, and I can't say it was fully conscious, but over the next year, I put in place a series of little systems that accelerated my reading rate. I canceled cable. I canceled my newspaper. I canceled my magazines. I put a bookshelf out the front door. I moved the TV, which of course still works with like Netflix and whatever. I put it in the basement. I started telling people what books I was going to read every month. Like I sent an email blast out with like Neil's recommendations each month. I did lots of little things like that. And I didn't think about them that consciously, but a year later, I went from reading 5 books a year to 50. I was so proud and enamored with myself that I wrote an article called 8 Ways to Read a Lot More Books. And it was just a summary of all those little things I told you.
Yeah.
Well, Harvard Business Review printed that article on hbr.org, and it became, if not the, then one of the most popular articles on their entire website all year. It was like the most reviewed and emailed website article for like 6 months straight.
Wow.
So popular that Harvard Business Review published it in a series of books. Okay. I know they did not pay me any royalties. In case you're wondering, they just print stuff. That's fine. But it signified something to me, Dave. Not that I'd written this incredible article, but that everybody, when they see a headline saying 8 ways to read more books, everyone wants that feeling. We all want to read more, but we don't feel like we can. And so that prompted 2 things for me. Number one, I started my monthly book club, as I mentioned. So now it's like up to like 35, 40,000 people. I'm actually going to work on it right after this on the plane. Every month I send an email to thousands of people around the world with just simply a list of which books I read and enjoyed that month. Okay.
Uh-huh.
That got popular. So then I started the podcast. The podcast is called 3 Books. I am on to answer your question about 15, I am on a 15-year-long quest to uncover and discuss the 1,000 most formative books in the world. And you'll remember my blog is called 1,000 Awesome Things. You will also maybe know or not know that the average lifespan in the US today or in the world is 1,000 months. 1,000 months is the average lifespan. That's how many months you have. And you may or may not know that the average person is awake for 1,000 minutes a day. So 1,000 is a really important number, I think. So 1,000 formative books, I thought, well, if I can lie on my deathbed, knowing that I read the 1,000 most formative books in the whole world, essentially annexing all the greatest minds and thinkers of our entire species, civilization, to my brain, then I will have absorbed more of humanity than I would have otherwise done.
Yeah.
If I just sort of like read the New York Times every morning, which I had. What would you rather have? A bookshelf of 1,000 books that you've read, or like a pile of old newspapers? So I'm on this quest. But then, of course, the challenge, Dave, is, well, how do you figure out what are the 1,000 most formative books in the world? You can't trust anybody. Amazon has a recommendation engine. I don't trust it. Okay, that's paid for. All the books that are there, people pay for them to be there. If you go to the front of a bookstore, again, those are all books that are paying to be there. If you ask somebody for their opinion, then there are books like this. You can go to a bookstore and find like 1,000 books you should read before you die. But that's like one person's opinion. So what I thought I would do is I would develop my own algorithm, which is I would search around the world for 1,000 of the most creative, unique, inspiring, different, diverse people I could find. Those are not 1,000, 333. And I would ask each of them which 3 books most shaped their lives. The only rule I have is that you can't pick a book that someone's already picked. Okay?
Okay.
So I have sat down with Malcolm Gladwell, Judy Blume, Chris Anderson, who runs TED, the world's #1 ranked Uber driver, the founder of the world's largest feminist magazine, Debbie Stoller, who runs Bust, and a lot of booksellers, and my wife. And I say, which 3 books changed your life? And we talk about those books, but more importantly, we talk about the themes relevant to our world today from the books. The books are a starting point, not an end point, because that's what books are. You don't just read a book and put it away. You think about stuff. So I started that podcast in 2018, and as you pointed out, it will not finish until 2031.
And that's going to take 15 years. We
Yeah.
started off with the number 15. So I wanted to share with you that my connection to the year 15 is that I'm in the 15th year of my podcast.
Wow.
Yeah. So in a way, I'm I'm where you're going to be.
Like, I didn't even know the iPod was 15 years old.
Yeah, it is. I started in
You
2005.
you started it when the iPod kind of was kicking around.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I knew I was confused when I first heard the word podcast because I had an iPod and I'd also been an amateur radio operator, so I knew the iPod didn't have a transmitter in it. So how in the world, could there be a podcast where? So as I looked into that, that's how I wandered into podcast.
So Dave, you're in year 15. I'm in year 2, and I have projections or a vision of being in 15. What advice do you have for me?
Oh my goodness. I don't think you need any advice from me. I mean, you're just doing such a wonderful job, following your own inner star. But I want to come back to something that you said is that, a lot of what you're writing about is intentionality and living an intentional life. But a few times you said something that kind of indicated that maybe you were following an intuitive feeling.
Huh.
And I I don't know if I've lived an intentional life. I didn't
Mm.
plan. I didn't really plan any of this stuff. It's
Hmm.
just I guess I've followed my gut. I followed my intuition, uh, and it's ended up getting me to good places. So it's a
Hmm.
little bit paradoxical because I guess I'm a short-term planner. Maybe following what does my intuition guide me to next.
Yeah.
Maybe
Well,
that's what I've done, because how else would you, have a PhD and go through all the things that look planful, but a lot of accidental stuff.
yeah, and you bring up a great point because I only started using that. So I've been writing now for 10 years. The Book of Awesome came out in 2010, and we're recording this in 2019. Um, so I did not start using that phrase, intentional living, until I think this year or last year. Now, the way I got to that phrase, and we can open up and talk about whether that's the right phrase, is that the Book of Awesome was just a printout of my blog. So it was just like, I wrote this blog to cheer myself up. It was a list of a simple gratitude every day. The Book of Awesome was that. So the Book of Awesome is really about gratitude. And this is just general in life. You don't know what you've done until you look back and see it, right? So
Yeah.
then the next major book I had was The Happiness Equation, which came out in 2016. When Leslie told me she was pregnant with our first child, I wrote a letter to that child about how to live a happy life.
Mm.
And that is the book. The book is the letter I wrote to my unborn son on how to live a happy life. Now, um, that book is about happiness. And then here I am now writing this new book, You Are Awesome, all about resilience. Right, the subtitle of the book, by the way, is How to Navigate Change, Wrestle with Failure, and Live an Intentional Life. So you see the intentional life first appears now, 2019. But that was because, Dave, I started thinking, I gave a talk at South by Southwest this year about trust back in March. So I'm really interested in trust. I'm really interested in resilience. I'm really interested in other things like love, relationships, um, how to be a great dad, how to be a great husband. I'm not saying I am those things. I'm interested in how to be those things.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so if I try to draw a thread line, from Book of Awesome all the way up to what I'm thinking about today, I can't say it's all about gratitude. I can't say it's all about awesome things. I've written the happiness equation. I can't say it's all about happiness because this new stuff about resilience and trust I'm exploring is not about happiness. So really the sort of larger umbrella I got to was, all of these points, gratitude, happiness, resilience, they're just about people being mindful and thoughtful and purposeful about how they live, right? Like doing these exercises because it makes you feel good, it makes you happier, or reading these awesome things because it puts a smile on your face. Like that's a mindful or intentional person in my view that lives like that isn't just coasting or being passive or just like letting life just sort of like I want people to be in the front seat of the car of their life,
Yeah.
not the back seat of their car.
Yeah.
And all I'm advising is that all my stuff is about how to drive that car,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
And I don't pretend to know how to drive this car. We don't even know what the universe is or why it's here or why we're here. I mean, let's be honest, there's just more that we don't know than what we do. But considering conscious we got a conscious mind for 30,000 days, all I'm trying to say to the world is let's value this so much, this amazing thing we have so much, that we just care for it so much, we appreciate it so much, that we just do it with thought. That's all. And by
Yeah.
the way, it also does turn into a paradox for me, Dave, because this stuff got popular, I'm now being asked to do, like I'm doing this podcast right now in an airport lounge before I jump on a plane
Yeah.
to Chicago from Toronto, where I am now. I land, I do another couple of podcasts in my hotel room. Then I get up, I do a speech I'm speaking to the Federal Reserve, you know. They all got copies of my books. I'll be staying there afterwards to sign books. I fly home. See, that's not that, and that's fine. But now there's a couple of days where you just see that where am I with my wife? Am I with my 3 little kids? Am I driving them to school? Am I helping to cook dinner? I have to be really careful because if I keep telling people how to do this, then the act of telling them makes me not do it.
Yes. Right. Right. You could be ruined by success.
Well, luckily
Uh
I have a very grounded wife and we've written a relationship contract.
huh. Uh-huh. You know.
So we have a prescribed number of nights away per month, a prescribed number of family days per month. We have a prescribed number of vacation. It's very high. So we have
Uh-huh.
structured it that way so that we do not miss out on life.
That's good. That's good. Um, some of my reflections about you or impressions about you, on your podcast, you come across as so kind and humble and open and curious. And at first I thought, well, maybe that's a Canadian trait. And to some extent, I think it is. Or at least that's a stereotype that we have about Canada down here. But then the other day it hit me, you're Mr. Rogers. I'd recently seen the film with Tom Hanks, and you bring that quality to both to your writing, but to the podcast is where I really experienced that. One example for me of your humility is your interview with the 2 young Mormon missionaries on the streets of Toronto. And geez, I've been approached by Mormon missionaries. We've got one of their arcs is 2 blocks away from here, but it's like, I just brush it off. I'm not interested in it. But you were so open and curious, and so I was so struck by that, as were other people who called into your show to let you know that. How would you describe yourself as an interviewer? Do you have a style that you're
Mm.
aware of?
Um, well, there's a few principles that I have. One is absolutely zero judgment. Right. So I
Yeah.
interviewed a sex worker, for example. She's the author. I went to Omaha, Nebraska to interview her. She's the author of the world's first children's book, which depicts a sex working parent.
I listened to that one. Yeah.
And even though the majority of the world believes that sex work should be illegal and criminalized, and they see nothing wrong with sex workers, for example, losing their children, which happens a lot. Like they have their children taken away because the judge rules that it's unsafe for them to be in that environment. I didn't know what I thought until I interviewed her and I asked her about those things. So
Yeah.
I wasn't gonna prejudge her. I was just gonna be like, so why'd you put a sex working parent in a children's book? What is and she told me stories that have completely, opened my mind. Like, did you know that because it's criminalized, if there's sexual abuse, if there's physical abuse, if there's harassment, there's no recourse where a sex worker can call the police, can get safety, can get support. You're almost operating outside of the legal channels, and that's not safe. In fact, if you call the police, then you might get more abuse.
Yeah.
And so that's the thing. So non-judgment is a big factor for me, because also, who am I to judge? Like, we all live different lives. We're all beautiful people. I believe that there's one energy source. I don't know what it is, but I believe that trees, the planet, the earth, the molecules in you, Dave, the molecules in me, they all came from the same place. They're all from
Mhm.
stars. They're all from, Neil deGrasse Tyson will go on the record and say, you are stars. You physically are stars,
Yeah.
right? So I took a lot of heat after that Mormon interview because, well, not heat, but some people said, what a kind, empathetic, curious interview. And other people said, how dare you give a platform for this bizarre religious fact? So you see, that's okay. I like having that provocativeness, because to me,
Yeah.
that's a sign that I'm exploring territory that's not there. The other principle I have is three-dimensional. And so I believe that the news media is two-dimensional. I believe that most films or television are two-dimensional, meaning that a character is given like a trait, and they are one way. And for the duration of that film or that TV show, they demonstrate that trait. But you and I both know nobody's like that. We are
Yeah.
all a terrible mixed stew of knots and twists and turns, and it depends whether or not you had breakfast, or if you had a fight with your partner, or if there was traffic on the way to work, or what the weather is, or how much you slept with. You're 10 different people in an hour. We all are. We have
Mhm.
moods. We
Yeah.
have the tides change, the moons change, our relationships change, our friends change. You get a nasty text, you get a positive text. So I want the show to be three-dimensional. That's partly why I record all my shows in person. I just want you to hear, even though Malcolm Gladwell's living room doesn't sound like anything, I want you to feel like you're in Malcolm Gladwell's living room. Or
Yeah.
Judy Blume. I did
Yeah.
her interview in her bookstore. Judy Blume's 82 years old. And do you know she works as a bookseller in her own bookstore in Key West, Florida? So I was already going to be in Miami for a speech, so I flew down to Key West. She was kind enough to give me half an hour of her time. And she said to me the same thing everyone says. Are you sure you want to record it here? You can hear the cash register beeping. You can hear somebody walking by. I
Right.
said, that's exactly what I want to hear.
Yeah. Yeah.
I want, when you listen to a baseball game and you can hear like the crowd or the
Uh-huh.
bats or the
Yeah.
announcer, I want that ambiance, because I want the show to be three-dimensional.
Okay.
I think that we have two-dimensionalized ourselves. Everybody these days is a brand. You go on LinkedIn, you're a brand. You're a fixer. You're a supply chain expert. You're an HR guru. Come on, guys. No one's two-dimensional.
Yeah.
No
Yeah.
one. Let's try to embrace our whole humanity here.
You're here.
You're here.
What's the third thing?
The third principle.
The third principle. Yeah.
I
Of
mean,
your
I guess you
style.
mentioned it already, but it's just deep, deep, deep curiosity and not being afraid to ask the stupid question. And so, I was super nervous in chapter 3 of 3 books to interview Seth Godin. I flew to Hastings-on-Hudson, which, by the way, does not have a hotel. It's that small. So I had to stay in a hotel in Yonkers, which is an hour north of New York City. And then I go in an Uber to Hastings-on-Hudson. The Uber driver can't even find the place. So now in Seth Godin's studio. Seth Godin is the author of 18 best-selling books on marketing, Linchpin, Purple Cow, Tribes. And so I'm like super nervous. He's a lot older than me. He's a lot wiser than me. He's a lot more successful than me. I go into his studio. We close the door. I hit record and I say, wow, this is a nice office or studio. And he's like, yeah, it's got a good patina. This is like 5 seconds into the podcast. And I had a thought in my brain. And the thought in my brain was, what's a patina? I don't know what a patina is.
Yeah.
So
You're
I thought
very
I could either
open.
ask him or not. And I said,
Yeah.
what's a patina? And he explained it,
Yeah.
as someone always does when they're asked a question
Yeah.
nicely. And then we talked about that. And I only mentioned that example, Dave, because so many people wrote me an email saying, wow, I love that you asked them because I didn't know what a patina was either.
Yeah.
but I'd be too scared to ask.
Yeah.
And so it's almost like having the intellectual confidence to know that it's okay and in fact good to ask the dumb questions because they're not dumb.
Yeah, that's is a very distinctive thing in your style. And one of the hats that I've worn in a multiple type career is that of a market researcher. And one of the things that I was taught to do is A, be very curious, and B, um, play a little bit dumb so that you
Yeah.
hear the response. I mean, I may know the answer to the question that I'm asking, but ask it anyway so that my clients can get it from their customer's mouth.
And one of the ways I like to do that, I love that you do that, and I think that's smart of you to do that. And one of the ways I think I heard this from like a morning show host or something. But it's the first question I ask is always, so where are we right now? Where are you sitting? What's the weather? Like just the like, oh, you're in Toronto. Oh, you're in an airport lounge. Why are you there? Where are you going? Like just something that's easy for them to answer,
Uh-huh.
because then then you can keep going a little deeper. Like, I interviewed Ryan Holiday in Austin, and it's again, you start off kind of nervous. And by the way, the person's also given a microphone and they see a record button being pushed. So, if anything, they're just a bit more careful with what
Yeah.
they say. But then you start saying, so is Austin still, just asking the basic questions and then go from there. The problem with that model, though, by the way, is that you usually get into the good stuff, an hour later.
Okay. Let's see here. What else have I got for you? Well, I need to ask you, and I'm probably not the first person to ask you this, which three books have been most influential in your life?
Yeah, I have told people when they ask me, I think I'm just buying myself some time, that I'm going to release that as like one of the last chapters of my podcast. So it'll be one of the chapters near the end where I talk about my own three
Uh,
books, partly because I think they're still being informed by these interviews. But I will give you one, which has really shaped me a lot, and it's partly why I created my podcast. It's a book called um, The Black Swan by Nassim Taleb, who's a behavioral economist. Like he's a smart economist guy. And a black swan event is a disproportionately huge event that we mistakenly try to explain in retrospect, but has a huge effect on our lives, like how you met your spouse, or you could say from a zoom out view, like the success of the iPhone or 9/11 happening or whatever. A black swan, totally out of nowhere, huge. Um, the thesis, though, is keep expanding your mind and your horizons and your opportunities to the potential of black swan events happening. I don't know all the people you interviewed in the last 15 years, Dave, but I will guess, probably pretty confidently, that a handful of those interviews have affected you meaningfully in some way, whether that's a behavior you adopted, a habit you tried, a direction you changed, a passion that was inflamed, whatever. And the thing is, you would never have had those handful of conversations if you didn't have 15 years worth of conversations. So the thesis of the Black Swan is keep putting a chip on every number on the roulette wheel. Life is so chaotic and unpredictable that no one really knows what's going to happen. So your best bet, quote unquote, to use that same casino metaphor, is to try everything you can.
yeah.
Like go to parties where you don't know anybody. Um, Try starting a podcast even though you don't know how to do a podcast, because these things will keep. And now that the podcast is getting bigger, it's happening now. My podcast, it's like almost 2 years into it, Dave. Now it's exploding, right? And now it's like
Uh,
I can see it's like getting big all of a sudden, really big. It's like, well, I would never have known it would have, and never mind get great guests and great pitches and all this, if I wouldn't have tried for 2 years when I didn't know what I was doing.
yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I like getting that sneak peek, and I'm going to have to wait some years to find out the the other two books, but hopefully I will be there. What else would you like to touch on? I know that you're going to catch a plane very soon. Let's make sure people know how they can find you. Which of your many things online would you like them to know about?
Well, like everybody in life, you can only explain stuff backwards, not forward. So about a year ago, I realized, oh my gosh, Neil, what are you doing? You have got a blog here, you got a podcast here, you've got this website, I have too many weird little things all over the place. So I encapsulated them all together in one place. I
Yay.
bought a website called www.neil, Neil, it's just my first name, dot blog, blog. So neil.blog is now the center point for all my stuff. From there, there's links to all my stuff, my social media, my TED Talks, my books, my speaking stuff, my videos, everything's there.
Excellent, excellent. Well, Neil Pasricha, I feel so privileged to have had this opportunity to speak with you. It's like going through the earbuds, having listened to you so much, and now being able to interact in person. So I really want to thank you for being my guest on Shrink Rap Radio.
Thank you so much for having me, Dave.